think you killed it.
No, it must be a hole there, maybe.
Pull it. Oh my golly.
Are you kidding me?
Pull it. You have gloves on? Just pull it. I need gloves. Do you have any gloves? Here, take mine. Thank you.
I think you crushed it.
Nope. I can't get a grip. How do you pull it out?
Like this.
Okay.
Now it's loose. Oh, there he is.
Hi, buddy.
Are you getting him? Are you recording?
Yeah?
Get out of there.
Whoa! He's a climbing rabbit.
Get out of there. Nope. So, came around to the second weekend of the youth season, and we went out, Kenneth and my dad, and Kenneth's buddy Luke and I, all four crammed into a ground blind, and the morning woke up, and we had some birds coming in eventually, just across the road from where we were hunting, and the two hens broke and started coming across the road, and the white truck flew by, and the hens turned around and kind of went back, and beautiful Tom came out and strutted, put on a show about 60 yards away. We tried everything we could to call him across the road, but he just wouldn't come. So we watched him for a while, had a good morning, but the morning ended there. So I had gotten an invite to go back to Kansas this year, and I had been thinking about a spot to set up for the entire year, almost, since I had been there in 2016. There was a spot that I had seen turkeys crossing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And the year before, I had set up at the other end of the farm. Gary had set up opposite of me, and we kind of spread out. But I'd watched turkeys cross in this one particular spot, and so I knew this was the spot to set up. So I set up there on the first evening we were there, and I got to see a couple of hens. Last year in Kansas, I shot a long beard with the crossbow, and this year I really wanted to take one with the compound bow, and so that was my plan, and set up in this spot that I'd chosen a year earlier. Got in there, no gobbles that morning, nothing close. I heard some way off in the distance, and Gary had told me, you know, if you don't hear anything close, grab your crossbow and take off, run and gun them. And so heard that first set of gobbles, and I was like, nope, I want to shoot them with my bow. Heard the second set of gobbles, it's like, nope, staying here, gonna do it with my bow. Third set of gobbles, it's like, all right, getting out, I'm going for it. So I grabbed my bow, and I took off on a journey. I started walking. I walked up this power line cleared area, thorny brush, trying to wiggle through it. I get through it, and I've walked and walked and walked, and man, I went forever, it seemed like, and I crossed back through some stuff and more briars, and I came out, and I wasn't that far from the blind where I'd taken off, even though I'd walked a long way. So I got back on it, kept walking. I'd stop occasionally and do a little calling, and I could still hear those gobbles off in the distance where I'd heard them before. So I kept going that way, kept working that way, and eventually I got to the road and I had to call, make sure I had permission. I did, so I went across the road and stopped and called, and there were some birds that I could see. They were gobbling back at me, but they were with hens and they weren't coming, so they kept going. I actually got down and was walking, and I heard birds behind me, and so I turned back around, and these birds had crossed my path between the time I had crossed and when I had turned around to go back. And so now, as I'm going back, there are these birds out in the pasture, and they're gobbling, and they work their way across, and I call a little bit from the corner, nothing happens, and then I'm like, well, I might as well go for it. And I cut across the field, and I started doing some fighting purrs. I was calling like a hen. When I got set up, I hit the box call really hard, thinking I wanted them to hear me, and they were 50 yards away. I looked up, they got when they gobbled, and they were right there. And so I put the box call down. I started eventually doing some fighting purrs, and these three birds broke. One of them hit 20 yards, and I shot him with the crossbow, and down he went. So my second longbeard in Kansas in 2 years, I was pretty excited. And then it was time for the hike back. And so hike back took a little less time because I pretty much made a beeline, made a straight line straight for where I was headed. Did have a interesting thing happen on the way back. As I came back into the original fields where I was hunting in the morning, I came around the corner and there were some deer. And they kept coming closer. A couple fawns got right by me before they took off. It was really cool. And then I got back to the blind and waited for Gary to pick me up.
That morning I hadn't seen much in the blind, so I took off with my crossbow again and headed over to where I'd shot my longbeard, and got this hen fired up, and she ended up crossing the fence about 10 to 15 yards in front of me. had me nailed down for about 17 minutes where I couldn't even move. I just had to sit there, and ended up watching her for over an hour as she just pecked around in the field and kind of kept close. She had about a 4 or 5 inch beard. Pretty nice bearded hen. I elected not to shoot because we were in our second full day. Still had the rest of day 2 and half of day 3. So just kind of watched her. Eventually she got back within 25 yards and watched her go back through the fence and head off. But a little miscommunication with Gary. I was trying to get picked up and didn't quite happen, so I started calling again and called in another bearded hen. 2 bearded hens in a row, and this one crossed by about 25 yards, but it was brushy. Didn't take a shot. And was talking on the phone with Gary. He said he had saw a long beard up in the pasture where my blind was. I thought he was talking about somewhere else, so I sat down and started calling underneath the cedar tree. And after about an hour of calling, had this Jake slip in about 3 yards from me and go out to the decoys about 12 yards away. And I turned the camera on, or so I thought, settled my pin on him, shot him. He went down, looked in the camera, he was flopping all around, and I forgot to hit record. So fortunately I got no footage, but did get the bird.
So the first morning when we got there, Gary and I had both kind of picked out our spots, but we didn't hear any gobbles that night. We didn't hear any gobbles the next morning. So I picked up and headed across the road, and Gary picked up and headed to another location. Well, on the last morning, I had my 2 birds down, and so I went to pick up Gary's blind that he'd set up the first day. And I get in there pretty early. I dropped Gary off at his spot to hunt and got in pretty early and was taking down his blind, and gobbles. I mean, they were right there all through the holler. Bunch of gobbles. So that's the way it goes sometimes in turkey hunting. They were right there, and they weren't there when we got there. So that was kind of neat. But we packed up and headed back home.
You. Illinois double, Daddy. Mother bear. This gun still kicks. Illinois double. Well, I didn't get mine on camera, but we just got an Illinois double. So, not much video. We got out here this morning, heard some gobbles way off on the ridge. Called just a little bit, we're quiet. Then I thought I heard a hen fly down pretty close. And we sit here and I hit the call and I heard 2 gobbles. And then we sat here for a long time, and then a bird gobbled right behind us. Something flew over, made a noise, gobbled. We waited, and we saw a hen cutting across the field. Kind of called lightly to her. She just kept walking. Looked up, right there, right beside us was a Jake. I said, "It's not a long bear, do you want it?" He said, "It's a bird." I said, "It's a legal bird." He pulled up, dropped it. Then out came another bird and he said, "There's your bird." And I popped it. So Illinois double, it's only 6:50. And we got 2 birds laying on the ground. We'll be back to the house by 7:30. So, awesome morning. That's Dad's second bird in 2 years. So, awesome. This one probably. Can you see the one by himself? Hey, video this one by himself. Oh, wait. You gotta make sure there. It's one that's by himself.
Yes.
Just video. Just video.
Is he dead?
Yeah, he's done. You killed him.
Look at that one. Can I scream?
Wait. Watch this.
And death.
And there's her bird.
Oh, cool. Where's his beard?
Dad, it doesn't have a beard.
Yes, it does. I saw it before I shot.
It's right
Oh,
there.
it's right there. Here it is. It's hiding. Oh, it's a paintbrush and covered in blood. That's gross.
Good job.
Look at these. What the heck? It's like dinosaur claws, man. I know, it doesn't have very large spurs, but that's okay. Hair in my mouth.
Alright, sounds good. See you soon.
See
Love
ya.
you.
Love you. Good job, sis.
Thanks. So we got in about, I don't know, like maybe 5:30-ish. And we called a little bit at first when we got in. There was lots of gobbling, but it wasn't too close. I mean, there was some over there and some over there, but and then we called some more. They would gobble. We heard some owls, a lot of geese this morning. We walked in, we saw some deer, but then we also saw turkeys when me and Luke were playing Color Switch, and Dad goes, live. I'm like, what? He goes, a bunch of jakes coming out. You could shoot any of them. I'm like, okay. So about 6 or so jakes came out, and they were all huddled around the decoy. And Dad goes, make sure you don't shoot the decoy and only get one. I'm like, okay. So there was one that was kind of by itself. So I shot that one, and then it kind of flopped around. The other ones just kind of were like, oh, what the heck? And then they kind of just stood around, kept standing around the decoy. Then they realized, like, okay, this isn't safe, let's go away. And then Dad called to them, and they're like, oh! And so, yeah, and then this little guy was flopping around and had his legs flipping around, and this is my crew.
2017, Olivia killed her bird. Pretty exciting morning.
beginning of those days where I was out turkey hunting, and those turkeys are up in the tree and they fly down off the roost, at the beginning of that day, they're not thinking, this could be my last day. One, their brains aren't that big, and two, even if they were, like most of us, we think that life will go on for quite a while, at least until we're in old age. But we're not guaranteed that. We never know how long we have, and those birds that we were able to harvest, they didn't know that day was the end, and we don't know either. Are you prepared for what happens at the end of this life? I have full confidence that because Jesus Christ died on a cross for the forgiveness of my sins, that I have been forgiven and that I will spend eternity in heaven with God. I have full confidence of that, but I don't know where you're at. And if you don't have full confidence of that, find someone you can talk to about it. It's important.